Thank you for coming tonight, and we will get the show on the road here. First of all, I want to introduce our alder, Bill Tischler. He's going to be recording the meeting tonight. And Andre, if you'd stand up too. And then we have from city staff, we have Heather and Ben, they're both in the planning. Heather is director of planning. And then Tom Lynch is the director of transportation. So what we plan to do tonight is have a presentation by the plan folks, and then have a little discussion on some regulatory, some National Historic District acts from the federal government, and then we'll get into question and answer. So with that, Heather, if you'd like to take over.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joe, and thanks everybody for being here and for inviting us to come to your meeting. We're pretty excited about transit-oriented development in general and want to take an opportunity tonight to provide a good overview of it, try to address your questions. We're aware that there are a lot of questions and some concerns, and we want to talk about where this initiative originated, where it came from, sort of the why behind transit-oriented development, and then dive into the details of what it means for different types of properties within the city, including properties close to where we sit this evening. So like Joe said, my name is Heather. I'm Heather Stouter. I'm the city's planning division director. I've been with the city for about 15 years now. And I'd say that early in my time with the city, we began to talk about transit-oriented development. It was something that was mentioned in our new zoning code back in 2013. And we've given it a lot more shape since the passage of our 2018 comprehensive plan. And so it's something that's been in the works for some time, really formally for about 2 years now, working with the city's plan commission to really shape transit-oriented development, or TOD as we'll refer to it from here on out. Ben Zellers is a planner with the planning division and has really been a project manager throughout this process, helping to facilitate community meetings, virtual meetings, and also taking this to our boards, committees, and commissions as they've reviewed and shaped it along the way. And so Ben and I will tag team this presentation a bit. Just want to start with a basic, what is transit-oriented development, and give it some foundation in our city's comprehensive plan, again, which was adopted back in 2018, the why behind transit-oriented development, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ben to really look at the geography. What area of the city does this proposed transit-oriented development overlay cover, and to talk about the details of what it means for various properties in the city. And we'll have some specific examples this evening within some local and national historic districts, since we're aware that that's one of the focus areas of this group this evening. We want to show some tangible examples of what application of the transit-oriented development overlay would mean for properties within this neighborhood and other historic districts as well. So first, at the most basic level, transit-oriented development is a pedestrian-oriented and compact, also mixed-use development really centered on quality public transit. So trying to find ways to allow more choices for people to live, work, be active, have recreation opportunities near transit in order to make transit really a more viable choice for transportation. And here are just a couple images. The one on the bottom, I want to stress especially that transit-oriented development can happen at different scales. It's not all 12-story buildings like you see on East Washington Avenue in the Cap East district, but transit-oriented development can also be a gentle increase in density, townhomes, even duplexes in places that before may have been just single-family homes. And so there are a range of scales associated with really boosting the opportunity for housing and other uses near transit. What is zoning? Many of you are probably really familiar with this, but some aren't. Zoning is a really kind of a black box tool that I think is a mystery to many. But zoning, most cities in the US have zoning, and it's basically a complex city ordinance that really regulates what you can do on a piece of property, what types of land uses, where can the building be placed, how high can it be, how far does it need to be from surrounding properties. Really lays a lot of the framework for what can be done on a piece of land. This particular picture here is just centered on sort of where we are this evening at the church. So this shows kind of the palette of different zoning districts within the city of Madison on this near west side location. And then what is overlay zoning? We've talked about transit-oriented development being an overlay that would be applied to those base zoning districts. One really good example that the city has had for years is our wellhead protection overlay districts. And that's what this image is trying to show. This is well number 12, also on the west side, and it's surrounded in red by an overlay district wherein certain uses are prohibited that might actually contaminate the city's wells. And so it's basically an extra regulatory layer on top of that base zoning that I showed in the map before. Transit-oriented development, I would promise, would be very different than wellhead protection, but it's the same type of mechanism. It's an overlay that's applied to a certain geography and basically provides a new set of a new regulatory framework on top of the base zoning that would stay the same. Like I mentioned, transit-oriented development has a really strong foundation in our 2018 comprehensive plan, and was even referenced, 20 years ago when we were first, when we were working on the first comprehensive plan for the city, which was adopted in '06. Our city now, as many of you can see, is growing fairly rapidly. We're not growing anything like the southwest major cities or the northwest major cities, but we are growing really fast for a Midwestern city. We're expected now to add about 100,000 new residents between 2020 and 2050. And so, right now we're sitting somewhere right near 275,000 residents in Madison and almost an equal number in our surrounding communities within Dane County. The city and the county continue to grow really rapidly. Where will those residents go? How can we make the choices and the regulatory frameworks possible to accommodate the growth that we're expecting in a responsible manner? Again, really focused on providing ways that people can take transit as a viable transportation option, as well as other options for transportation. But in our comprehensive plan, I'm going to focus on two key strategies that have been that were listed in the comp plan and really gave rise to transit-oriented development. The first is concentrate our highest intensity development along transit corridors, downtown, and activity centers. And a specific action was to implement a TOD overlay zoning district along bus rapid transit and other existing and planned high-frequency transit routes. And so when I turn it over to Ben, you'll see that the transit-oriented development overlay district, as proposed, covers not only the BRT or bus rapid transit routes, but also other high-frequency routes along Monroe Street, Atwood, and Cottage Grove Road as well. And then next, in our neighborhoods and housing section of the comprehensive plan, there's an overarching goal to really create complete neighborhoods across the city where residents basically have access to transportation options and the choices they need for their day-to-day lives. And one of the key actions within that section was to support integration of a mix of housing types and neighborhood amenities near existing transit corridors and shared use paths as well. So there's a strong basis in the city's comprehensive plan. But more broadly, why transit-oriented development? We know it's recommended in our plans. Why is that? Transit-oriented development, we think, is a good mechanism to implement the types of development that we have adopted as a city within various plans throughout the city. And it supports, it's a way for the zoning code to really support what we want to see as a city. We know we need to accommodate a lot more housing citywide. We want to do that near transit. Let's make those changes to our city's zoning code to allow that to happen more smoothly. And then it's also a better match between zoning and our city zone investments in transit. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, it's really looking at existing and future residents and making sure that we're increasing people's choices, increasing the mobility of our residents, particularly those that live a car-light or car-free lifestyle. And so you think, many of you may already live a car-light lifestyle. You have great transit options here. There are many folks in Madison who live day-to-day, certainly without access to their own vehicles. We want to make that more possible, more common, and again, elevate people's choices with regard to where to live and how to get around, particularly using less automobiles if possible. reduces overall household expenses. If you can live near transit and really rely on it for a lot of your day-to-day needs, you won't have to pay that $300 to $500 a month for a car payment. So it's a way to really reduce expenses at the household level, certainly a more efficient use of land. The amount of land that car parking takes up in our city is astronomical. You look at some of the, I'll give an example, some of the taller new buildings on East Washington Avenue that might be 12 to 14 stories in height. In some cases, nearly 30 or 40% of the area, the bulk within those buildings, is taken up by parking. So it's an enormous amount of land and building space in the city that's taken up by parking. As we continue to grow, we want to slow the increase in traffic. We don't think we'll actually see traffic decline in Madison necessarily, but we want to slow that rate of increase. We live on an isthmus. We live in a city that has an isthmus that really is kind of a choke point. We don't have a lot of opportunities to increase capacity on our roadways, nor may we want to take those opportunities if they were there. If we really want to rely more on transit, we need the land use that goes with it. And then finally, and perhaps stating the obvious, just reducing the emissions that do come from driving and that impact on the environment. With that, kind of setting the table for the rationale for TOD, I want to turn it over to Ben, who will really dive into the details again on the geography that was proposed and also how that geography has changed as this ordinance has gone through some of the committee review. And then also just the details of what it means for various types of base zoning throughout the city. Ben? Sorry.
Great, thanks, Heather. So starting to get into some geography here. This is a map up on the screen of the TOD overlay area as it was originally introduced at council. As was kind of discussed at boards, committees, and commissions leading up to that. You can see it excludes downtown, already a very transit-oriented portion of the city, already subject to its own height limits. It also excludes the UW campus area, which has an adopted campus master plan that governs development in that area. And then, as originally introduced at council, it also excluded local and national historic districts from the TOD overlay boundary. So this area, kind of shaded in purple, includes about 14% of the city's land area. So a fairly significant portion of the city, and really touching on, I think, 14 or so older districts as it runs from east to west and north to south. And you can see it's within close proximity to planned bus rapid transit along that, a little bit further. Within close proximity to that east-west planned bus rapid transit line shown in red. But then it's also in close proximity to other high-frequency transit that's shown in blue lines, so kind of, as Heather was mentioning, running out Monroe Street to out Cottage Grove Road. Then there is an additional phase of BRT in the initial planning stages that runs north-south, shown in a green line, and this TOD overlay kind of runs along that planned future BRT service as well. And then after this TOD overlay was introduced at council, as other ordinance changes do as well, goes through committee and commission review process. So in this case, this TOD overlay zoning was referred to the Transportation Policy and Planning Board and the Plan Commission for their review, discussion, and input, as well as their recommendation. And what TPPB and Plan Commission recommended was that national and local historic districts within close proximity to high-frequency transit service be included within the TOD overlay area. And so we as staff have to be responsive then to board, committee, and commission recommendations. And so this map shows what areas then would be included if the council were to move forward with the committee recommendation. And I'll go through kind of a little bit more of the approval process towards the end of this discussion.
Can you give us some insight into the reasoning they gave around that, or not?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. Those meetings were actually recorded, so if you want to look back to those, Plan Commission and Transportation Policy Planning Board, you can easily do that. Those were fairly extensive discussions, certainly. And summarizing those extensive discussions, I guess I would just say that it seemed to be, from both committees really, that they thought it would be appropriate to encourage this transit-oriented development in these historic districts as well as the other districts, feeling that for the local districts in particular, there are some pretty robust ordinance protections that are in place that kind of provide additional guidance to development as it gets proposed in local districts. And that for national districts, there were some areas within these national registered districts that could be appropriate for transit-oriented development as well. So Heather, I don't know if you have any other kind of initial...
Yeah, I think one of the things that came up, at least at Plan Commission, did have to do with, if we're promoting more housing choice for folks in the city, why would they, the Plan Commission, say that those choices couldn't happen within historic districts? And so there was sort of an equitable distribution of housing choice that was an undercurrent of that discussion as well. And there wasn't 100% agreement on it, but as a committee, that did come up in their discussions as well.
Thanks, yes, that's a good point.
Could I ask a quick follow-up question?
Maybe if we could circle through the presentation and go to questions at the end. We might actually answer some questions as we go along, but we
Well,
definitely...
just a quick fact, in adding the historic districts, what percentage change does that make in terms of the overall plan?
I don't have the number off the top of my head. It might go from like 14 to 18% of the city or something like that. But I don't have the acreage or the exact percentage off the top of my head.
It doesn't look like that from your map.
I mean, it adds a fair amount of area in terms of acreage to the overlay area. But like I said, I don't have a specific percentage.
Thanks.
So I did want to talk a little bit about some of the specifics of the TOD overlay zoning. So there are really 5 main components to this proposal that will be in front of council next week. TOD overlay includes residential dwelling unit bonuses, includes building height bonuses in select zoning districts, so it's only a handful of districts that are along those TOD corridors. And it includes some additional site design standards for buildings. It has site standards for automobile infrastructure, and then parking and loading standards as well. And so I just emphasized before getting into some of these details that it's not really a rezoning. These are additional regulations on top of what's already there. So all of the existing zoning that's in place for parcels right now will continue to be in place going forward. Again, if you could hold questions to the end, we'll get through the presentation.
What is going there?
Can we keep the questions to later?
Well, we need to know what it means.
We need to know what they're referring to.
I agree. I like your question. I like me. What is bonuses? Are you going to pay people?
That's what we're getting to here. So that's why I wanted to hold questions till the end, because I think we'll be able to address a lot of what might come up this week as we go on. So as far as residential dwelling unit bonuses, the approach that's taken for this TOD overlay is that the next increment in residential intensity is allowed as a permitted use in residential and mixed-use zoning districts. So that is a bit complicated, but what I mean by that is if, for example, there's a single-family district in place right now, which a lot of the Hill Farms area is covered by a single-family zoning, the next step up, the next increment up in intensity is a duplex, and so that would be what would be allowed under TOD overlay in those single-family districts. There are other types of districts in this TOD overlay as well. There are multifamily districts and mixed-use districts. One of the multifamily districts is SRV2, a suburban residential varied 2 zoning district. Right now that has a maximum number of dwelling units under current zoning of 24 per parcel. Under TOD overlay, the next increment up, the zoning code is 36 as a permitted use that would be allowed in that SRV2 zoning. Mixed-use zoning district is TSS, traditional shopping street. Right now, up to 48 dwelling units are allowed as a permitted use in that, as part of the mixed-use project in that zoning district. Under this TOD overlay, the next increment up is 60. So it's really that one step up, that one bump up, in addition to the current underlying zoning that is allowed under TOD overlay. And then there is one employment district that will allow residential dwelling units as a permitted use that does not currently allow those. That is in the TE zoning district, traditional employment. Right now, all dwelling units in TE have to get a conditional use permit, but under TOD overlay, up to 24 dwelling units would be allowed as a conditional use in TE zoning. Really, TE zoning is largely concentrated along East Washington Avenue, so not really a whole lot on the TOD overlay area on the west side. And so this is that same map kind of revisiting, and just wanted to highlight kind of where single-family zoning districts are prevalent within national and local historic districts. So broadly speaking, they're in those areas circled in purple. Like I said, the next step up, the next increment up in development intensity in those areas is really just going from single-family to duplex as a permitted use. Building height bonuses, as I mentioned, this is only in select zoning districts, so really only in a few multifamily residential and mixed-use zoning districts. So the SRV2 and TRV2 multifamily zoning districts, and then NMX, neighborhood mixed use, and TSS, traditional shopping street zoning, mixed-use zoning districts, would go from a maximum permitted height of 3 stories to 4 stories under TOD overlay as a permitted use. The TRU2 multifamily zoning district, which is what many of the properties along Sheboygan, kind of between Sheboygan and Rennebaum are, would go from a maximum of 4 stories to 5 stories in height as a permitted use in that zoning district under TOD overlay. The CC, or Commercial Center District, would go from 5 to 6 stories maximum height as a permitted use. Those are usually properties that tend to be out along highways. There's a lot of CC zoning in the Westtown area right now. And then the RMX, Regional Mixed Use Zoning District, would go from the maximum height as a permitted use from 5 to 8 stories. Right now, the only part of the city where that's mapped is select pieces of the Oscar Mayer, or former Oscar Mayer plant. So overall, this brings the maximum permitted height closer to compliance with plans that have been adopted by the city over the past 15 years, both in terms of the comprehensive plan and then many neighborhood development plans for smaller areas of the city. The third component of TOD overlay is site standards for buildings. The biggest pieces of that are properties within this TOD overlay would have maximum setbacks for principal buildings, so that would generally have buildings be a little bit closer to the street for TOD overlay properties. There would also be a building entrance orientation requirement for mixed use and multifamily residential to have a building entrance that faces a public street. Basically, generally would end up facing the transit route to make it easier for residents and employees to access transit. And then selected zoning districts and multifamily mixed-use commercial and employment areas would have a minimum height of 2 stories. So some residential, including all single-family residential zoning districts, would not have that minimum height. They could be 1 story, 2 stories, whatever is currently allowed. Site standards for automobile infrastructure. So one of the components of TOD overlay is really to have that focus on transit and not have that overly disrupted with accommodations for cars. Cars certainly still part of all development, including, or most development, including development in TOD overlay. But there are certain design elements to TOD overlay to try to minimize some of the impacts of automobile infrastructure. So there would be those design-based regulations to parking, loading, drive aisles, and gas pumps. They would not be allowed to be located between the building and the street, again, to make the building more accessible to people who are using transit. Drive-throughs would need to be located under the building and covered by upper floors. There's an example of this and how it was implemented kind of on Monroe Street for, you might be familiar with the Associated Bank building, kind of close to Camp Randall. And then any parking structures would need to be lined with active ground floor uses to avoid having that parking, fronting right up alongside the sidewalk and right up alongside the street. Finally, there are some additional parking and loading standards that will be integrated into the parking and loading portion of the zoning chapter. There would be decreased automobile parking maximums in TOD overlay. There would be no minimum automobile parking standards in TOD overlay. This kind of mimics some other areas of the city that already have no minimum automobile parking standards in certain zoning districts. And then the adequacy of the amount of automobile parking would no longer be a standard for conditional uses when no minimum parking is required. So that's kind of in the weeds a little bit, but that is a change that would be integrated as part of this TOD overlay. So some of that is a little bit esoteric, so I wanted to get into some TOD overlay zoning examples and really focusing on a few sites, case studies that are within historic districts, either national or local historic districts. So these are all examples of what would be possible as a permitted use under TOD overlay zoning. And I just want to emphasize that property owners will continue to decide if and when they would want to undertake remodels, additions, or redevelopment of property. So none of these examples are proposals. These are all conceptual and don't represent actual recommendations or anything that is even percolating through the city development process right now. So you might see some sites that you're familiar with, but that doesn't mean that anything is happening in the first sites. So the first property is along Whitney Way. So this is an example of a current SRC1 single-family zone property. Right now, all single-family zone properties in the city have the ability to add an accessory dwelling unit, so that wouldn't change under TOD overlay. But the thing that would change for single-family zone parcels in the TOD overlay is that they would be allowed to add a second dwelling unit to the main structure to have a duplex.
Where would they park?
Wherever you can currently park for the property. So a lot of people park in their driveways, people park in garages, and driveway and garage parking could be part of a duplex in this instance, as it is throughout the rest of the city of parkplexes. Another example, certainly familiar to this area, is along Sheboygan Avenue. This is a property that currently is developed as multifamily housing. Currently three-story buildings that contain 286 dwelling units. Under TOD overlay, the only thing that would be allowed as a permitted use on this property is a 60-unit building up to 5 stories. Anything more than that would require a conditional use approval. It's possible that if someone were to look to redevelop a site like this, they would seek to subdivide it. It's a fairly large property, and so even if they subdivided it and did 5 buildings of 60 units per building, that would only get them up to 300 units, which is about what the site is accommodating right now. And so not often, if ever, in the city do we see someone propose tearing down a 286 unit building to put up a 300 unit building. It just doesn't make economic sense. So in this instance, if someone wanted to redevelop at a higher intensity, they would still need to secure a conditional use approval or rezoning. Another example along Como Road, very similar to that Whitney Way example. Again, in a single-family district, and under TOD overlay, this would be allowed to have a duplex on the site in addition to the ADU that would currently be allowed under present-day zoning. This is an example on the Isthmus. This is a parcel that is zoned TRV1, Traditional Residential Variant 1. Currently has a 3-story building that has 4 units in it. Under TOD overlay, 6-unit building of 2 to 3 stories would be allowed, so really just increasing by 2 units under TOD overlay as a permitted use on this example parcel. And finally, another example, again on the Isthmus along Gorham Street. This is a piece of land that has 3 kind of freestanding multifamily buildings that are 3-story buildings, currently having 24 dwelling units in those existing 3 buildings. Under TOD overlay, the maximum number of units as a permitted use would be 27 in this case. So again, rarely does a developer pursue tearing down 24 units to build 27. So in this case, again, if they wanted to go beyond that 27, they would need to secure conditional use or rezoning approval as whatever they would approved goes through or proposed goes through the approval process. So just want to wrap up talking a little bit about the timeline. So this is the timeline for the TOD overlay zoning approval process for the language that was introduced at council. Really leading up to this, the Plan Commission, I believe the first formal discussion at Plan Commission was in September of 2021. That was followed by many other Plan Commission, Board, Committee, Commission meetings and discussion throughout the rest of 2021 and then through most of the rest of 2022 as well, including a series of public meetings late last spring. So this is really leading up to the introduction, had a pretty thorough review and discussion process through the Board, Committee, and Commission system before it was introduced at Council as well. It was introduced at Council on November 22nd. As I mentioned, it was introduced at Council excluding local and national historic districts through the discussion and referral process. On December 5th, the Transportation Policy and Planning Board recommended that the Council include local and national historic districts that are in close proximity to transit in the TOD overlay. The Plan Commission on December 12th concurred with that, made the same recommendation to Council. Originally, this was slated to be considered by Council on January 3rd, but the Plan Commission asked for that to be pushed back, and the Council Vice President and President agreed to push that back to January 17th to allow some additional publicity, discussion meetings like the one we're here in tonight. There's going to be a second one then this Thursday as well, a virtual meeting. So if you're aware of anyone else who's interested, I certainly encourage them to sign up and attend at that. And then at Council on January 17th, they will be considering and discussing this proposal and may vote on it one way or the other that night, or it's possible they might consider it on a different later night if that's the direction they go in. But everyone's comments, testimony is certainly welcome at Council, and we can try to summarize comments and questions and thoughts that we hear tonight as well for Council. So with that, that's all we have for the presentation and introduction. I want to turn it back over for facilitation.
I've got to turn this on just for a second. I just want to continue on with one other thing before we start getting into the questions. And I think it's going to be something that I think you'll be interested in because it adds to the conversation. Ma'am, you have a question? Not yet. I just want to get through one section here first. And then the section I start out with is a federal act from 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act. Now, I think most of you folks were probably 4 or 5 years old, maybe? Something like that?
Right.
Or maybe just a twinkle in your parents' eyes. I think that's mostly what it is. You guys look too young. But what that act does, especially Section 106 of that act, specifically states that a historic district, well, let me just grab the act here. I want to make sure I get this right. I should be more organized than I am. This is the act. You can see it was probably done with by a monk back that time. Section 106. The head of any federal agency having direct or indirect jurisdiction over a proposed federal or federally assisted undertaking, indirect jurisdiction over a proposed federally assisted undertaking in any state, and the head of any federal department or independent agency having authority to license any undertaking shall, prior to the approval of the expenditure of any federal funds in the undertaking, or prior to the issuance of any license, as in the case may be, take into account the effect of the undertaking on any district site, building structure, or object that is included in the National Register. Hill Farms is included in the National Register. So what has to happen is that we're getting bus rapid transit funds. We do have an impact, the bus rapid transit will have an impact on our neighborhood. With that, because of this act, there has to be an analysis done. Now, this analysis was done. Excuse me for a second here. That was completed and sent on January 24th of 2022. That went from the Federal Transit Administration to the State Historical Society, which is specified in the Act. In this, in Section 2, and this can be provided to anybody who wants it, it states, and the people who were commenting on this, there's a whole series, two of which were from, let's see, there's Madison Metro, there was, let's see, Madison Landmarks Commission, I think two under Mr. Lichtown, under your jurisdiction, Mike Chickvala was part of this, and Graham Carey.
That's correct.
So in this letter specified that, and I'll just read just a couple sentences. The project team and city staff are recommending that any TOD zoning exclude local and the national historic districts from the zoning overlay. So this was approved and sent to the State Historical Society. My understanding is when this then allows for the funds to start flowing for the bus rapid transit. Now, as we go along through the year, that's how we all understood things to be. I think the planning department here had recommended to exclude the historic districts through this process. In the beginning of August, the Plan Commission met, and during their discussion took an informal vote to include historic districts. Okay, but that wasn't formal. I think a lot of you were at the mayor's meeting in October of 2022, the town hall, where I think, Ben, you got up and said that historic districts would be excluded from the ordinance.
The staff recommendation was that, as you stated, yeah.
And so my understanding is that the mayor was a sponsor of the ordinance going through. Let me get my notes again. I'm getting old and forgetful. That the mayor and other alders introduced that ordinance on November 22nd. But December 5th, as was noted, that the Transportation Policy and Planning Board meeting on December 5th, that was changed. And I believe, Mr. Lynch, you were part of that and responded to that. I think you had said you had talked to somebody at the Federal Transportation Administration.
Yeah, so, maybe I'm probably going to give a dollar answer for a dumb question, so please excuse me. Okay. So, the Section 106 process is part of the Historic Preservation Act, and it's linked to the National Environmental Policy Act, right? And the National Environmental Policy Act is our environmental document. And that's really a procedural type of document saying we need to follow a process to make sure that people have comments and the like. And so in both our 106 submittals and then also in the National Environmental Document, we stated that the city is considering transit-oriented design that could have an effect on historic districts. We said that the staff recommendation, both in the environmental document and our 106 materials, as you said, the staff recommendation would be to exclude the historic districts, but the transit-oriented design is a separate action that actually we don't have full control over, as evidenced by this meeting, right? Other policymakers made other recommendations at committees. We have talked with the FTA. We've notified them that this is occurring. And I think we were straightforward in our environmental document and our 106 materials that this could occur. This is a separate action, but it could occur. And right now, the FTA currently views it as a separate action. Okay, so that we've disclosed it both in our 106 submittal and in our NEPA submittal. So there's still pertinent questions before you tonight on, is this the right thing or is this what the city wants to do? But from my conversations with the FTA, they are viewing this as a separate action that was disclosed in our environmental document and our 106 materials.
Okay, thank you. I just want to go a little bit further with this, though. There was a 6-month period where this could be contested. I believe that 6-month period ended on November 18th. So I don't think many people in this room had understanding of this process. And, this is one of the things that I would say to folks here, if you have any comments, let our alder know, let all the alders know, let the mayor know. Because that's where this is finally going to be decided at the city-county meeting next Tuesday, a week from today, the 17th. Just want to double check in here. So that's essentially what I wanted to give folks an idea of understanding the history of what's going on. So make your voices heard. Now we can go ahead.
Can somebody tell me what that means for me? So I think that we're all here because we're single-family house owners, and a lot of us are in that little zone that so I understand the ordinances and limitations and parking situation, but what does that mean for me? So we're here today because somebody decided, we went back and forth, we questioned it, but we're still here today because it's happening. So what does that mean for us? Does that mean you're going to be buying out the houses that are for sale and putting in duplexes? Does that mean that a huge company is going to come in and buy out, a street worth of houses? What does that mean for us?
Things like that happen.
No, thanks for that question. So the city does not have plans to come in and buy a lot of properties, particularly single-family homes in this area. The city does have plans to look for properties, underutilized properties, old commercial strip centers with a surface parking lot up front, vacant sites where we think affordable housing could be a really good fit. And we have land banked or purchased properties along South Park Street, along East Washington Avenue for that type of purpose. The city, though, has not embarked on any sort of strategy to purchase single-family homes and add units to them. I really think that this is, if most people here are among the city's homeowners, which again is a percentage of our city, but I'm getting the sense that maybe a lot of you here are in a position where you own a home in a single-family residential district. Really the essential change that transit-oriented development would mean would be that you or a future property owner of your property would have an option to add a second unit to that home, whether it be a basement unit, an addition to the back of the home. If you're in the National Register Historic District, You could even access tax credits in order to help with that conversion, as long as the historic integrity of the building is maintained throughout that process. Again, if you're in that category, you own a single-family home in a single-family residential district, today you can add an accessory dwelling unit to your property. You have that choice. It's a permitted use. The only change in the TOD overlay would be that you could pursue a second dwelling unit to that principal structure, your single-family home that you own today. Does that make sense to folks?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to start calling on people. The fellow back there, I think your hand up was
Yes.
on the first one.
So the tiny home thing, it sounds like if anybody wants to, this is going to allow them to potentially build a tiny home in their house. And honestly, I think this is the wrong neighborhood. I don't think any of these people bought into this neighborhood thinking that their Frank Lloyd house next to them is going to have a tiny home in the backyard of their adjacent neighbors. And also by your numbers of increasing these dwellings, it looks like our potential population could increase up 20-25% by your projected numbers. Is that, when you talk about increasing from 4 to 5 to this to that, and just that, basically it's a 25% increase of population in our neighborhood. And one last thing is, it looked like when you had the purple to blue, it looked like Hill Farms was, in my opinion, paying at least 50% of the burden of this historic thing being adopted by the Planning Commission, which I'm not sure why you changed your ideas on one to another. I really wish I had knew what happened in between those two dates, but neither here nor there. Looks like we are unjustly paying for your decisions of adopting this proposal. For rezoning, by the way, zoning is not a black box. When any of us buy property, we know what we're buying. When things change in the middle that I begin, and I had this happen to me before, and I didn't like it, and I don't think it should happen, but I don't like things zoning should change in the middle, and so it's not a black box, and don't make it sound like we're too dumb to understand it. We understand the zoning rules, and we're here, some of us, to voice opinions changing them. Thank you.
Yeah, so,
I've got a lot more to say too, by the way.
Just want to mention as far as the tiny house concern, that is a very specific type of development that is only allowed in select zoning districts. ADUs and duplexes are subject to a much more stringent and strict building code. And so that's something that would need to be adhered to for anybody who wishes to pursue that.
Okay, the couple back there, the woman with the red turtleneck.
Could I'd like to just clarify too, city staff are neutral, okay, on this, and city staff proposed an ordinance that excluded the historic districts. So the committee members, which are made up of policymakers and alders, this is where these changes have occurred. So I just want to kind of put a little line saying that we're here, to listen, and then if you want to tell policymakers like alders and committee members your concerns, that's where you do it. But city staff, we've recommended, our recommendation has been to exclude them, and so maybe I'm feeling for Heather and Ben, and I just don't want them to be the focus of a lot of angst. Okay, what they're here is to.
I mean, it would help us to know your reasoning behind excluding it.
And the privacy.
And why?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I do want to circle back to the person who had the questions and comments before, just to clarify about accessory dwelling units. They're not part of the transit-oriented development overlay. If you're a homeowner, you can pursue an accessory dwelling unit by right today. You can walk into the zoning counter. The city would approve it. Your deed restrictions don't allow that. The city would allow that today. We're not changing your deed restrictions either, so that's something that, if that's important to you, if you're in that category. But back to the question of why was the staff recommendation originally to not include the local and national historic districts. I think the main rationale behind that was really a discussion, many discussions at the city's plan commission, where we didn't want to confuse or have our zoning code conflict internally. We have strong protections, especially for local historic districts. Some protections for national historic districts as well. And I think the optics of then adding the ability to do more within those districts really was something that many plan commissioners weren't comfortable with when this came up a couple years ago in early discussions. And there really wasn't a consensus around that at our plan commission discussions. And so we felt that it would be best to just take the historic districts out of the mix in the version that was introduced. Now, if you can look back at all the recorded meetings on this and see the discussion and kind of the different threads, different angles, I think that the change essentially was made, the reason I mentioned before, if the city's going to be adding more housing choice, distribute that equitably throughout the city. Don't exclude certain areas from that, the historic district. So that's where some of that discussion led. And then I think that also there was a recognition among some policymakers that, wow, well, this really won't lead to very much change, and certainly not very quickly. It's adding the ability to add one more unit to a home. It's not tearing down homes for 4-story buildings. And so I think that was part of the discussion and the reason why that shifted. Thanks for asking that question. I think that's important context. Again, you can watch the recordings for yourself and draw your own conclusions.
Okay. Ma'am, you've been waiting for a little bit. Go ahead.
So if my neighbor decides to sell their home, retiring, and the city's not going to buy it, of course the city's not going to buy it. They don't have the money to. But Madison Property Management or one of the big developers in town could buy that house. They could knock it down and they could put up a duplex. Meanwhile, their neighbor next door is going, and they're ready to retire and head to Florida or wherever they want to head, and they're going to sell their house, and pretty soon you have a line of duplexes. Yeah, maybe. Look at the neighborhood next to Janet's Antiques and the UW Credit Union on University Avenue. That small Shorewood Hill neighborhood, over the last 30 or 40 years, each house has been bought up by the same developer who paid good prices. Don't bother to sell it to somebody else because you'll get your best price from that developer. And if you look, maybe not on University Avenue, but go around by UW Credit Union, and what have you got? You've got a big field that's waiting for all the rest of those houses to go down so we can put up some more apartments like the Lodge. Not a bad use, but is that the neighborhood we want?
Thank you. I just would like to add something here. How many people have actually looked at the neighborhood plan? Okay. Have you counted the number of apartments that are being planned through the neighborhood plan?
It doubles us.
We've got over 2,000 apartments. They're going to be coming into this neighborhood within the next probably 3-4 years. That includes Madison Yards, which is going to bring about 500 apartments in. Hilldale Phase 3 is now going before the Urban Design Committee to get their approvals. Glad has put 2 buildings up.
Westgate.
Westgate, well, yeah, Westgate, well, if you talk contiguous properties, Westgate, you've got the one at the corner of Mineral Point and Whitney Way, another flat apartment building that's down by Old Middleton Road. So we've had a lot of development along that BRT corridor.
Why rezone?
So what?
Yeah.
So I'm just making that point.
Good
So,
point.
well, we'll go to the next question, sir.
So my question is that you talked a lot about the single family to multifamily or to duplexes. There's a whole line along Manitowoc that are already duplexes, and that's bordering pretty close to a lot of us. What can they go to, because it's considered a multifamily or 3 to 4 units? Is that like 6 to 8 units then? Is the next step up?
We would need to look at their base zoning district to find that out. Let's say that they're zoned today to allow for 2-family homes. There wouldn't actually be another change there, except they could add an accessory dwelling unit.
So they're duplexes now, they're state duplexes.
Yes.
And SR, is it SR? I don't know what the base zoning is, I'm sorry.
They're duplexes now, I don't know what they're zoning.
I would just say, I believe they would get +1 as well. So if it is allowing duplex right now, it would be +1 unit, so it would allow a threeplex. In reality, because of building codes, we don't see a lot of 3-unit buildings constructed because the method of construction changes once you go from 2 to 3 units. So it's pretty rare to get a 3-unit building constructed. But
So it looks like it's 3 to 4 right now. Is that-
Oh, it's zoned for 3 to 4?
Yeah, according to this map. So that's why I'm
Okay.
just kind of curious what it goes to then.
like I said, we would need to refer back to the base zoning to make sure of that.
Okay, because I'm just curious on how dense could that possibly become along that road there? Because that is, like I said, that's well within that quarter mile of Wakey Way.
Yeah, I guess for each base zoning district, it's just an incremental change up. The places where we'll see the most
On your
change.
slide, you show us, you have a slide, you just show us the slide where,
Well, we don't have a slide that shows the
You showed
zoning
it.
code.
well, no, you don't, but you showed like how a 1 could go to 2, can you put that
Yeah.
slide up?
Yep.
Sure. So this doesn't have the full list of all the zoning districts in it. It's just kind of an example of that
Right.
next increment, up. And so depending on what the base zoning of the parcel is, it just is that next step up in development intensity. So it would take referring back to this specific zoning for the specific property to see where it falls in that range.
Sir, you were at your hand for a
Yeah,
while.
please. How does co-op housing interact with the overlay zone?
It isn't addressed in transit-oriented development overlay, but it is permissible across the city today. Cooperative housing is permitted in all residential districts today. The transit-oriented development doesn't address that or take it any steps further.
Ma'am, you could.
In Madison, is there have the many area, why you pick up our area for development? What is the good benefit for us?
Really, maybe I can cycle back through to the map.
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
The question was, why did we pick this area and the areas, I think, in general for TOD overlay? And why those areas were selected? Is that?
For example, why don't you do it in Shorewood Hills?
We don't have zoning, so that's a different municipality. We don't have zoning control over any other municipalities, just the city of Madison.
Is our area needed back?
So,
Does the Madison have another area same us? Or is the
right,
for
so,
our single house area, did we resident request, we want to develop?
so the reason why the TOD overlay area was selected and mapped as it's shown in this slide is that it is in close proximity to high-frequency transit. And so it really matches that TOD overlay close to transit lines like future planned bus rapid transit, like high-frequency local transit service. And so it mirrors the corridors where there's that high level of transit service. And so that's how the areas were selected, both in Hill Farms and then kind of through the University Avenue corridor, out through the East Isthmus to the north side, to East Washington Avenue and Cottage Grove Road. All those areas selected because they are close to excellent bus service.
It's the for this one, it's the for outside Madison people coming, is the benefit for them, not the benefit for us.
Well, I mean, I think transit, sorry, the question was about benefit.
Yeah, this is because we bought this the property, we wanted to live here, it's the comfortable. It's the now is what benefit for us. Now is we are feeling transport easy, better place for convenience for us. Now you squeeze us, what we are building the storage, living, and then future. People more living here on the area, even more parking, it's more density. So no, it's the future. It's the department.
Right. So yeah, that's.
You already have commercials, many places like having there's Madison, many places they have storage on there. Even it's in the block. They have many storage.
So is the main question then about benefit and?
Yeah, so
the related to that, one reason is, as Heather mentioned and has been mentioned, we're a very fast-growing city and county. And so one of the questions is, where do all those people who are moving to Madison live? They can live in close proximity to transit, to have that as an option to take to get to jobs, to school, to wherever it is they might go. Or if they end up living in Wanakee or DeForest, they're going to be driving on our roads in Madison to get to their jobs, whether it be downtown on the far west side in Office Park or wherever it is. So TOD, it can be a pretty effective method to reducing that increase in traffic that tends to happen in growing communities by allowing people that option to take transit. Both existing residents certainly, and then new residents as new residences are added along these transit corridors.
Developers need after the Madison, you can develop the land, build some house or building the storage there. And then from there you can transport. That's I'm thinking for our area, long time, you want to change here with us. And then why you not have the support for outside?
Let me add a little something to this if I can. And maybe I can expand a little bit, but I just want to ask one question for Heather and Ben. We're talking about historic districts. Mansion Hill is a historic district, very close to all of the transportation that's going on. You said that was excluded. Why is that excluded versus Hilltops?
Right, the whole downtown was excluded from TOD overlay because a lot of the regulations that are in place for downtown are different than the rest of the city in terms of the zoning districts that are present downtown and how they are implemented. As an example, downtown has a maximum building height map that's not present throughout the rest of the city. And so one of the instances of the TOD bonuses, height bonuses for certain zoning districts wouldn't make sense downtown because that's already subject to maximum heights under existing zoning. So there are many aspects of downtown and the downtown zoning that are different than the rest of the city.
And I would just add that downtown, far more development is already permissible and allowable than the types of intensity that transit-oriented development is working toward. And so it's almost irrelevant. Downtown is already developed far more intensively, and the zoning in downtown allows far greater intensity than what the rest of the transit-oriented development areas shown on this map are. So that's why downtown was included. We still are seeing an enormous amount of growth downtown, and we want to. It's well served by transit and other amenities. 1,500 new units were approved downtown just this past year. That growth won't stop, but the rationale for not including it in this is because it's already so much more intensive than what transit-oriented development is.
In the capital, before we have a beautiful capital, the building on there. Then later on, they built too many high levels. They covered your beautiful.
Ma'am, I may have to move on to another question. So sorry.
It's not the answer. It's in Madison, they have another development area.
Let other people have a chance to speak, ma'am. You've had your chance now. Thank you very much.
Sir.
I guess I'm just going to go on record as I'm in support of transit-oriented development. I think it's key to a successful city. Growth is happening, whether we like it or not. I often see zoning as a restriction on my freedoms to use my property as I will. So I'm happy to have more open zoning for me to choose to put an accessory dwelling unit, whatever I want on my property, because it's my property. But I also want to speak specifically to her, which is this is kind of like...
Is there a question?
Yeah, no, this is more of a comment, I guess, because there's a lot of questions that are asking the same thing. So I want to talk a little bit. There is the elimination of the equity situation where all the historic districts were kind of skipped and we're supposed to just stay how we are and the rest of the city is supposed to develop, but not us. So we have great neighborhoods here. Accessory dwelling units allow for even more people to enjoy our great neighborhood. Totally for having more people here and opening that up. So, Chairman of the minority.
Sir.
Okay, there's just a lot I don't understand. So I have a comment first too. Yeah. That this whole, we were under the impression even 6 months ago that the historic district would hold, and we didn't have to worry about the zoning overlay or anything else like that. And something happened that we don't understand. And I guess I would encourage Alder Tischler to represent our district and say, we're not going to exclude this. We're going to exclude the historic district. It's only one district. The second point is, I think most of us here have the original deed restrictions when the hill farm was developed. And you're saying you're not going to change the deed restrictions, but it wouldn't allow this extra dwelling on the lot. Can't even put up a garden shed. Right. So how is that going to work? Are you guys just going to steamroll over that? Because those deed restrictions were there for a reason, to preserve the character of the neighborhood. And that's, a lot of us are relying on that and counting on those to hold, so that, the things that Mary pointed out, unchecked development that we don't want to see. So I don't understand. Are the deed restrictions going to get rolled over by this or not? And then how come you reverse course on the historic district?
So the question was about deed restrictions and then the change in including historic districts. I guess for deed restrictions, the short answer is the city doesn't get involved in administering deed restrictions. So deed restrictions, they're in place. The city doesn't govern those or administer those. And then for the change, I think we've talked about that a little bit already, but it certainly, if you want further background about why the boards, committees, and commissions have made the recommendation that they have, why the Transportation Policy and Planning Board made their recommendation, why the Planning Commission made their recommendation, I'd encourage you to go back and watch the recordings of those. That discussion really lays out those committees' reasons for recommending to council that historic districts be included in the final version.
We can put out the videos of it. I think Alder Tischler had a blog that summarized a lot of that information.
And yes, that's a good point. If there's a project website, and we have links to all of the meeting recordings throughout the TOD process. So if you probably just Google City of Madison Transit-Oriented Development, it'll probably get you there. It's the page is through the Planning Division's website under plans. I don't know if we're hooked up on Wi-Fi right now, but we can try to do that. But there are links to all of the meeting recordings and all the discussions that have taken place in committees for the TOD overlay.
Are you guys signed up to Alder Tischler's blog?
Yeah.
So maybe you can reissue that one.
Yeah, it's still out. Yeah, I was confused as to everything going on, so I asked. You'd think somebody who works in media would actually know how to use a microphone. No, there's a lot going on, a lot of confusion. Every time I ask questions, I got the standard response: go back and look at the videos. this is nobody really has the time to sit through all of those. So what I asked council staff to help me with is to write a memorandum. And I posted that on the website to try to give everybody kind of a balanced understanding of what's going on. One of that's the reason why we're asking to have these public information meetings, to add more clarity. I mean, one of the things about the last couple of years, is we've been living in a vacuum. We've been in Zoom meetings, but we haven't had a chance to really engage. And so I think it's hard for a lot of alders to understand fully what the public, how they feel. And I think this is an issue. That I talked to other alders, they're like, this is no big deal. They've actually said that on record. This is just, but it's clear by the people who show up here, this is a big deal. And that's why I wanted to have this kind of engagement here. I will, as best I can, I will keep posting stuff to the blog, and then again, just reach out to me. Help me figure out the questions to ask, and then I can ask those questions. I also want to thank the staff too for coming here. This is their recommendation. Well, let me again. I'm here to listen to everybody. Don't let me occupy the microphone.
And believe me, Alder Tischler can talk your ear off. Let me work this side of the room. Ma'am, back there?
Me?
Yes, please.
Hi. Are the federal funds dependent on changing the zoning for the historic sections of the city?
No, this is a separate, this TOD overlay process is a separate process, as Tom had mentioned from that. This is a recommendation in our comprehensive plan that we were looking to implement, really regardless of bus rapid transit. We still wanted to pursue, under the recommendations of the comprehensive plan, transit-oriented development. We would really be moving forward with something along these lines for high-frequency transit areas, even if BRT wasn't in the picture.
Okay. And then I guess I feel like I want to address a couple comments that were made that made me feel as a resident that perhaps this meeting would project some sense that we're not open to helping Madison grow and evolve and welcoming new people into the area. And in my opinion, that's wrong. I feel like this neighborhood has been incredibly inclusive. Madison Yards is a massive introduction of numbers into the community. All the places that Joe mentioned, you can point them out, and nobody's up in arms about that. And I think that for myself, the part that upsets me about this is the process that I trusted. I know that my neighborhood team is amazing, and they stay on top of things, and they let us know about any changes that are important. And this feels like it was sort of snuck in, and that now to hear you say it's just a gentle change, or it's not a big change. I understand what you're saying, but there's something that really grates on me when I hear that, because that's not fair. Or to say, just look at the videos. I wasn't planning on setting out this amount of time to devote to, within the next week, to try to stand up for a process that I think has been somewhat flawed. And there's just something about that I feel, unfortunately, there's like this sense of conflict that I don't think needs to be present, but it's because we're hearing about it at the 11th hour, and this neighborhood is incredibly open and welcoming to growth and change and inclusion, and I don't know. And then my last thing is, what about the impact on the schools? How is that going to be taken into consideration? And I know maybe you guys can't address that, but that is gigantic.
Yeah, great comments. I hear you. I think that one of the reasons that I use the term gentle increase in density is because I have heard a lot of questions coming in and comments about this taking a single-family neighborhood and putting up a bunch of 4- and 5-story apartment buildings. And so part of that is correcting things that I've heard as the planning division director come into me, and I realize that didn't come up tonight, so I apologize for that. Thank you for bringing that up. This type of change, albeit single family to 2-unit, can be an enormous change that you might feel as a property owner. So I want to definitely validate that statement and apologize for making it seem like it's nothing if that's how that came off. So thanks for bringing that up. With regard to the process itself, yes, this was supposed to be at the Common Council on January 3rd, right after the holidays. It was pushed back a cycle so that we'd have this meeting and Thursday's virtual meeting because of that late-breaking change in December. I've tried to respond this evening with a couple of my takeaways from why that change happened from the policy-making bodies, the Transportation Planning and Policy Board, the Plan Commission. They talked a lot about it, didn't reach consensus, and then finally, when it was time to vote to move a version of this forward, some of the main elements that I think really led to that vote were, hey, if we're increasing housing opportunities, let's do that equitably. Let's bring these historic districts back into the mix. The base zoning doesn't change there. We think that the changes in TOD are likely fine within our historic districts. It's not a wholesale change. That was some of the tenor of the discussion that I think led to the vote. And when I say watch the videos to get your own impression, that's really if you want to dig deeper into that. But those are really, my takeaways from those conversations and why policymakers acted and voted in the way that they did to pull back in the historic districts in those December conversations.
Just one quick follow-up for me, and I don't know the answer to this, but my impression from the little bit I've read is that there isn't equity within Hill Farms the way it's being done because it's a quarter mile in. So you're dividing our neighborhood into an area that it would be rezoned for duplexes and then the rest of it remaining single family. That's what my impression is. I might be wrong, so I don't consider that equitable. As a property owner who bought a house in a single family
Why not the
area.
whole city? If you're going to go equitable, just do the whole city.
Do the whole city.
That might happen.
Can I add something to the conversation right now? I was a chair for the neighborhood plan. We worked 3 years on the neighborhood plan with the city to integrate harmoniously Madison Yards, which was at that point the largest development in the city of Madison, also Hilldale, and all the other properties that are listed in our neighborhood plan. So we are not adverse to welcoming people into our neighborhood. We do want to make sure that this neighborhood maintains its integrity. And that's where we want to go. I believe we have done that. Now, as far as the schools go, hey, take a look, come to some of the meetings with the developers. They're only developing two-bedroom apartments. They're not family friendly. They're not 3 bedrooms.
You don't need 3 bedrooms.
You don't need 3 bedrooms. Well, yeah. I understood, but I'm just saying is that's one of the things that's happening. That's been discussed with our planning committee with the developers. Our planning committee sits with each developer and has gone through this. Now, one thing to watch out for going forward is that the city's going to area plans and not neighborhood plans. That's going to eliminate some of the voice of the neighborhood. That's just letting you guys know that could be happening. And right now, there's a west side area plan that's starting up. Go on, take a look at the Odana area plan. Those are all out on the city site. So, I'll stop right there. Sir, back there.
Yeah, a couple of points to what you're saying. If you live in the neighborhood
and you haven't looked at the details of that map, I encourage you to do so. We live at 5026 Marathon Drive. A quarter of a mile in starts next door to us. And we are a good 2 to 2.5 blocks from Whitney Way. It includes all of Juneau. It includes all of Regent Street. It includes all of the neighborhood behind the Hill Farms pool. So that map is nice, but it does not tell the whole story.
Right.
That's a comment. I want to follow up on your question about the schools, and I want to push back a little bit on what you said, Joe.
Okay.
The Planning Commission, I want to know what specifically the Planning Commission does when they are considering new buildings, new infrastructure coming into a neighborhood. How do you specifically plan for the growth and the impact on the schools and the existing infrastructure? Don't tell me you talk to the developers and they say they're 2-bedroom units and they're not going to be any children. Our daughter's a teacher at Van Nuys. She got her job this year because there were more kids in the neighborhood, because I think lack of planning and lack of addressing the city. So I want to know specifically, how do you do that? Because I know it can be done, but I'm not sure you're doing it.
Sure, I can speak a little to that. It doesn't have much necessarily to do with this exactly, but when we embark on a new sub-area plan and try to imagine and project where growth should go, where growth is going to go, we meet with any affected school district, whether it's MMSD, Sun Prairie, Middleton, others, and make sure that we're working collaboratively with them. I know that at least for MMSD, the Madison schools, they actually have their own formula. They will look at development or a bigger picture projected number of units and run it through their own formula to try to give their best guesstimate of how many children might end up living in an apartment. You know, let's say that it's an 80-unit building with 51 bedroom units and 32 bedrooms. There are formulas that they use based on development that exists today that give them kind of the best available estimate of how many children will be in their schools based on that new building. So we work with MMSD both on kind of the long range growth projection end of things, and Ben has done some of that in the last decade certainly. And then also we try to make sure that they're aware of significant projects as they're moving forward. In a lot of the schools, there's ample capacity, like they wouldn't even bat an eye at a new large apartment building. But in others, where they feel like they're close, they'll crunch those numbers and look at, again, a model, a guess of how many students would actually live in a proposed building.
Okay, I've been over to this side. Let me go over here, sir. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, briefly, I just want to second the gentleman over there's remarks in support of the overall plan. I think it's a good idea to allow duplexes in neighborhoods like this and provide increased opportunity for kind of affordable housing for younger families who might not be able to afford a single family home these days. But that being said, I do have a question of clarification, which is I still feel like the question of the deed restrictions has not been that clearly addressed. So I understand they're different from city zoning, but how is this actually going to work in practice? Like, isn't it still the case that the deed restrictions will be on the books? And so, sort of in practice, like, is it actually common that developers just ignore deed restrictions? Is it common to get a construction loan to build a duplex on a property with a deed restriction where that's not allowed? I would sort of have expected that that's not that common, which would make some of these worries about radical change maybe a little bit assuaged. But I'm just wondering if you could, and maybe this is sort of a question about what the neighborhood association will do in practice, how it will sort of work if somebody comes along. You know, suppose somebody wants to build a duplex on a
challenge that. That's in our neighborhood plan. It's on one of the pages where we talked about accessory dwelling units and our covenants. So that's been addressed with the city.
But you
and
can
we
still
will hold
challenge,
to our covenants.
we can still challenge it, right? If
you can challenge it, but
yeah.
we will also defend.
Yeah. So in a way, the changes are probably not going to be that radical in practice, right? I don't know if this.
I don't know if you're looking for a city staff answer. It sounds like the question's been answered from your neighborhood leader. So.
Well, I would be interested in your sense, just as a not so much a policy question, but like what are the facts about the market currently?
Yeah.
Is it
So I can't,
common that a developer would actually do this? Oh.
I don't think so. The city is not involved in deed restrictions. We don't enforce them. We usually, if we're involved in review of a project, we'll find out from a property owner or would-be property owner that they're facing a deed restriction. And by and large, I think those deed restrictions are adhered to. If they're not, it's a civil matter that the city's not a party to. But there are a lot of neighborhoods, including some newer developing neighborhoods that do have homeowners associations and covenants that will prohibit some of the elements that we're discussing in transit-oriented development.
Okay, another question, Ryan?
In the December 12th meeting, this was brought up, I don't believe it was answered. Why are Rennebaum and Garner Park included in your map? Is there any chance of anything changing with those two parks? They're rather large, filled-in areas.
There are no park-related regulations in the TOD overlay, so a park being in the TOD doesn't impact the park in any way.
Okay, and then to follow up, I'm looking at the ArcGIS website, to the gentleman's question earlier. Manitowoc, they are currently zoned SRC3, so those become B1 for the
So SRC3 is a zoning district that allows up to 2 unit buildings, so duplexes today. So that the next increment up would be a 3-unit building that could be allowed in the SRC3 district. Thanks for looking that up. I appreciate it.
Sir, you've been handing your hand up for a little bit. Go ahead.
It's not a question, it's rather a comment. We as single home buyers have made a decision to live where we want to live, obviously, for specific reasons. So I would encourage everyone tonight, and thank you city staff for initially taking your stance, we appreciate it. I would encourage everyone tonight to reach out to all of the alders across the city, whether you email them in bulk or whether you attend the meeting, to express your opinion. Because we are all expressing our opinion tonight, but I think that the alders across the city need to hear this loud and clear. And I think that you need to reach out to other members across the city that may or may not be in local or national historic districts as designed on the map to encourage them to do the same. So I think that for several of us, it does feel like a little bit of a sneak attack when this was brought up in November and then went to the Planning Commission on December 12th, and all of a sudden, January 17th, they're going to make a decision. So I think we need to be vocal with alders, we need to be vocal with our mayor, and I would encourage everyone who leaves tonight to do so.
To your point, sir, Friday, the agenda comes out for the city council, as I understand. All the agendas come out so that they are posted 24 hours or 48 hours to give notice to the public. At that point, you can go in and you can sign up to give comment, either in person at the city council building. It's in Zoom, so you can do it by Zoom, or it also has links to provide all alders or the mayor, however you want to write your request. Ma'am.
Yeah, I have a zoning question in terms of, is there, with the current ADU allowance, is there an owner-occupied requirement with that? And then with the 2-unit, is that also, the duplexes, is there also an owner-occupied requirement?
With the accessory dwelling unit, there is an owner-occupant requirement, and the owner can live in the ADU or in the principal building, either one, and that can change over the course of time. In a case where you'd be creating a duplex, well, okay, this is a complicated one, because an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, can be within the same building already, so you can have that basement unit already, or it can be over a garage in the backyard. Either one. So yes, there is that owner occupancy requirement in either of those cases. The idea for the duplex would be that there would not be an owner-occupant requirement for the 2-unit alone.
And then I just wanted to add, as the example that she was talking about, in terms of how the building might happen, I saw that there was a real estate association that had gone on record in support of this when it was introduced. Of course.
Sir, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I think what bothers me about this, in part, several things. I think it feels like a foot in the door and a slippery slope, and that ultimately the only people who are going to be really helped by this are the real estate developers. And I think that may be a feeling that some other people share. It seems to me like this is a backward approach to what you say the problem is, which is making transit available to everybody. And instead of thinking about ways to expand the transit opportunities, like using smaller vehicles and having computerized menus that could tell people when they need to be picked up, and have smaller vehicles that can take people to a bus stop, that makes more sense than trying to, in fact, increase the density of the neighborhood and build more unaffordable apartments for people, many of whom probably will not necessarily use the bus. They may park cars. They'll bring more cars to the neighborhood. On Whitney Way, there will be more traffic coming and going from Whitney Way because of the increased number of people who are living there if this is implemented and it goes forward. So I could say more, but I think it's a really bad idea, and I think it's misconstrued.
Next, let's see. Got a lady way back there.
I'm wondering, we're hearing the term housing choice a lot. What kinds of studies have the city done to ensure that the construction that is happening is the housing that people want? And
There are a number of housing studies, and I'd love to refer people to the website again, but these are pretty extensive reports. This is something that definitely is looked at by planning, community development, CDA. Ultimately, it's not up to us as a city to dictate in many cases what types of housing gets built. We review proposals that are presented to us by landowners. So I think in some respects what's being built is in response to the demand that the landowners are seeing. There's been a huge boom in student housing, and I think that's a response to students wanting to live closer to campus, and also the increased enrollment that the UW has had without they themselves increasing the amount of housing they're providing. And then the vacancy rate, certainly for rental housing, has been very, very low for the city for an extended period of time. And so when it's as low as it has been, which is, I think it's hovering around 3% or so, 5% is often looked at as an equilibrium between renters and property owners. When there's that level of shortage, in apartments for rent, the landowners tend to respond to that because they know if they build them, people are going to be moving in. One of the housing studies that was done looked at where we need more housing in terms of income levels. And really it was kind of surprising to me, some of the results of that, because it found that we certainly need more housing at the lower ends of the income levels, affordable housing that is available to people working in restaurants or retail or teachers just starting out in their jobs. But also it actually found that there's a shortage of housing, and this may be hard to believe, I was shocked by it, but shortage of housing at the higher end as well. And you see all these new apartments going up and you think, how could that be? But a lot of the people that may be moving into the city are looking for apartments with amenities. And so when they can't find what they're looking for, they rent down. They rent to something that may have been more affordable to someone else. But because they have the income and they can basically rent whatever they want, they're able to take up that housing that otherwise would have been affordable to other folks a little bit lower in the income scale. So really it's kind of a barbell situation where we need more housing in the lower end and more housing in the higher end. That's something that one of our housing studies for the city of Madison did actually discover.
Questions? Sir?
I had a thought about this whole additional dwelling unit thing, and to the extent that all of this stuff is going to increase the impervious areas of these lots, how is that going to square with the city's stormwater rules?
So I guess maybe just taking Madison Yards as an example, I doubt that was developed with any sort of stormwater management plan in place. But as redevelopment happens, redevelopment is subject to current stormwater management regulations. So in the case of Madison Yards, they need to treat and manage more of the stormwater that comes down on that site than the DOT used to have to manage when it owned that full site. So there is actually some improvement that tends to happen with many redevelopment projects as they progress, because properties need to come up to the modern redevelopment standards for development in terms of stormwater management. So that can end up being a benefit in many cases as those projects take place and redevelopment occurs.
And I'll talk just a little bit about the other end of the scale, since we're talking to folks interested in the single-family residential districts. So the zoning code, some of you may know this already, also has a regulation that sets a minimum lot cover or a maximum lot coverage requirement. So it really sets a ceiling on what you can cover with building, driveway, basketball court, tennis, whatever impervious surface can be there. Those lot coverage maximums are not changing under transit-oriented development. And so you'll still see the same amount of either required, grass lawn or required pervious pavers. If you have a pervious paver system for a patio or a driveway, that can count toward it. But again, the TOD overlay isn't changing the lot coverage requirement, which is the closest thing we have to kind of the single-family scale on stormwater management.
I'd like to add a little bit to this, just from a neighborhood standpoint. One, for Madison Yards, if you take a look at their diagrams, that central green has a cistern underneath it, which is supposed to collect the water and then release it, such as Hilldale does, and the new Phase 3 of Hilldale will. In our last newsletter, we have in there the adjustments are going to be made over on South Hill, along Segoe and the like, to tie into the, what's the creek? The watershed.
Willow Creek.
Willow Creek, thank you. So the Willow Creek watershed, the big cisterns or the big pipes that go along University, well, what they're going to do along in our neighborhood is part of that project. It's going to be in the back end. So it's going to take some of that water away so we don't have the flooding. Those are the types of things that will be happening. So, sir, way back.
I want to ask a question from the city. You said that basically the need or what happens with the building is determined by the landowners. And that sounded nice, because that sounds like us, but did you really mean the real estate developers who own those big lots? Or
are they the ones pushing this?
Who decides, what kind of choice goes in, whether it's a two-bedroom apartment or one-bedroom apartment goes to the landowner? Can we agree that the landowner and use the developer in that case? And the second thing is a comment, and then I'll sit down. I think that this is all nice, but I don't think hill farms will be the hill farms that we know and love when this is done. And I think that we will just see an exodus from hill farms, of what made hill farms, and often to Baltimore or any place else. It'll take a long time, and none of us will probably be around to see it, but I don't see this as a good thing.
Okay, another question. Ma'am, way back there.
Can I have a quick answer about the developer?
Oh, about what, sir?
Developers and landowners being some.
Yeah, so for someone who is a property owner undertaking a development or a redevelopment of their property, that would be one and the same. Yeah, you're correct.
No, ma'am.
Yeah, we couldn't get a tax credit to put a metal roof on our house because it didn't comport with the historical nature of the neighborhood. But apparently our house can be torn down and a duplex can be put on there. And that really befuddles me. And I'm wondering, do the federal preservation people, does this matter to them? Are they concerned about this? Are federal funds in jeopardy because of what's happening in this historic neighborhood?
I can maybe answer some of that as far as, okay, the historic district ripping down, if the person rips it down, they rip it down. But then what happens is it takes that property out of the National Historic District Registry. That you can check with the State Historical Society. There is, if you go out to the site, you'll see preservation, Howland preservation or whatever. That's where you go into. If you try to get the tax credits, you know that where that is. And I think Glenn Dable is the person who watches the area around here, so you can talk to her. What was the second part of your question?
Well, I was wondering, well, in answer to that, I mean, then the historic, this designation as historic designation is completely meaningless. Because anyone can come in and put a duplex on a historic building that was meant to be a 1950 single-family owner-occupied building. So that designation is pretty much meaningless. And so my question is, do the federal preservation people, are they aware of this? Because they're following it so closely that we couldn't get that tax credit to put a metal roof on our house. Are they really okay with tearing down houses and putting duplexes?
Well, I just want to go back to what Mr. Lynch had talked about before about talking about the Federal Transit Administration and getting a ruling saying that it's okay to do some of these things. But then, we had that letter I referred to earlier, which refers to Section 106 of the Act, that 1996 Act. That's what has to be focused on. I would suggest that you talk to your alders about this, you talk to the mayor, you talk to our state senators about this, because they're the ones who can come to the FTA and talk to them. That's what I would do.
There's one other element I just want to touch on in relation to your question and comment. National Register of Historic Districts don't come with any design mandates. The only design mandate that comes is if you want to secure tax credits, which is what you experience. So really someone, your neighbor, whoever, could come in, tear down the house, build a new single family home that's wildly out of character with the historic nature of the surrounding area, and there's no design element in our zoning code or our historic preservation code that would prevent people from doing that. But they just would have to do that without tax credits. So whether or not it's a duplex doesn't really relate to the historic nature of the area. Really, someone could potentially construct an addition to make a house a duplex that is done in a historically respectful manner. But on the other hand, someone could tear down a single-family home, build another single-family home that is not done in a historically respectful manner. So that's kind of the dissonance that is in place for National Register districts.
And one other thing I forgot to add is that with that 106 process, if that is reopened and looked at again, that will stop funding for the BRT. Because if you read the act, funds cannot flow until that letter is approved or there's a total approval. And there should be a time to contest. Now that time to contest was November 18th. However, there was an email sent to Mrs. Bryseth, who was on that list, a week after the sample vote, if you will, by the Planning Commission in August. That, I would believe, would be constructive notice to the federal government. And we'll see where that goes. Sir, way back.
I just wanted to say, I appreciate this talk overlay. And when I look at the west side of the farm, I don't see teardowns there. I think the houses are beautiful. I think they'll stay there for a long time, but just like, I don't expect to see an hourglass look the same. When I look back at it, I expect it to change. I expect to be older. I expect things to change my eyes. I think that's one of the beautiful things about being human. And I hope the same thing happens to our neighborhood. That it continues to change.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make note, we have about 10 minutes, let's say, or we can maybe go a little bit longer, but just, we're getting probably toward the end of our time that we can stay in here. Ann.
I just wanted to say that I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea. If it's a good idea, I don't understand why it's limited to certain parts of the city. If it's a bad idea, I don't want to have any part of it. Specifically, I don't understand why this quarter-mile distance is so important that they have split the Hill Farms neighborhood in half. This has been a cohesive neighborhood for 60 years. And that line just zigzags through the middle. There are only, I don't know, maybe there's 10 streets in Hilldale in Hill Farms, and 5 of them are split in half by this line. There's a Cheyenne Circle has 5 houses on it. 1 house is on one side, 4 houses are on the other side. There's no rationale for the way the lines were drawn.
Mirror the transit line. The rationale was explained at the start of this presentation. Mirror the bus transit line is where the...
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So this is just about the bus line is definitely happening, right? Regardless.
Yes. Okay. The bus line will be built.
Okay.
The question is the Section 106 process.
Okay.
That has to be determined. Sir.
Hi, I'm a new resident at Hill Farms. We were very intentional in choosing this neighborhood because of its historic nature. We love 50s and 60s ranches. We're dedicated to architectural preservation. We were very happy that it was a single-family home kind of neighborhood. I have a practical question and then another question. The practical question is whether if the rezoning passes, whether that changes how the city assesses our property and how it's taxed.
No, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that question. So the zoning of the property, the base zoning of the property would not be changing. This would be an overlay applied to this area that's being shown behind me here. But the tax would not change automatically because of this, or the assessment would not change automatically because of the addition of a transit-oriented development overlay. So great question. If a property owner anywhere within this transit-oriented development overlay were to add a second dwelling unit to their home, that assessment would likely go up because it would be increasing the value of that structure.
But what I hear you saying is that the city of Madison is not going to say your property is more or less valued. Okay. Correct. And then the second question that I have, being new to this process, is so is this meeting like informational, like, hey everybody, get used to this because it's happening? Because, I thought, I would prefer not to be rezoned. But it feels like the city is kind of telling us like, hey, get used to it, and then on 17th, maybe we're just gonna pass this and you'll just have to check it out.
Yeah.
So is that what's happening? I could just use a yes or a no would be very
I guess I would say no. I have no idea what side the council is going to come down on for this issue. So I think it's very much up in the air, and so if people are interested in providing their comments, I think that'll inform the council discussion of the issue.
But tell the mayor, right, tell the authors.
Mayor, council, yes.
Does the mayor even vote on this? Does she care?
Actually, the mayor would vote on this if it's a
Only
split
if it's a tie.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking for these, the reason why I was asking for these is things were being rushed through this. I raised objection. If you go back and watch the videos, you'll see that I raised objection to the council president, saying, you're introducing this change. You haven't given us time to talk with the constituents. I was told that you got a couple of weeks. I countered by saying this is a couple of weeks during the holidays. This is still, you're rushing this. Again, when it was pushed back from January 3rd to the 17th, it gave one of the reasons why I was also very vocal in there too, saying we need time to bring up people. I think had we not started, raising alders that do have historic districts in here, had we not started raising attention, this probably would have just flown right through. Would have been no. I wanted to have some engagements. I wanted to have it in person, not just virtual, because I wanted to kind of confirm the feelings that I had from the neighborhood. I've been in this neighborhood for almost over 50 years now, and I kind of got a sense when this is going on, this is not going to sit well with people, and so this meeting here is helping me understand and actually confirming what I was believing going in. I will be very clear. I've told this to the mayor. I will be voting no. And I've been working very hard to make 9 other friends on the Common Council as well who feel the same way. And I've been making a few friends over the last couple of weeks. So thank you everybody for coming here. I appreciate it.
Let's see here. Someone who hasn't talked before. Ma'am? Sorry, please.
So I have 2 questions. One is, can someone buy multiple lots and combine them in a single-family residential neighborhood? Like a developer? Like, so if someone buys 2 lots, can they then put a larger building, or is the same restrictions, like what lots?
I see what you're saying. Short answer is no, because really the same limit. The question was, can someone purchase 2 lots in a single-family residential zoning district, combine them, and put something larger, and by larger I think you mean multi-unit building?
Yeah, something more than 2 units.
Sure. Something more than 2 units, she's asking. And the answer to that would be no, because the zoning still applies within that area, that the most units allowable on any one lot would be, it was 1, now it would be 2, plus an accessory dwelling unit. So no one's going to be purchasing multiple units, demolishing them to build 1 new structure. Unless they're making a straight, they could build 1 new single-family home or 2 unit, but economically it wouldn't be attractive.
Okay, and then my question is, the second question is, what SRC2 district, what changes apply to that housing?
Sure, so she's asking, in the SRC2 district, which I'm imagining a lot of you might live in, that's the Suburban Residential Consistent 2 district, where single-family homes right now with an accessory dwelling unit are the maximum allowable. So in that base zoning district, SRC2, the only change would be that the single-family home, you could add a second unit to that single-family home and have the accessory dwelling unit that's allowable today. Swirling around the conversation this evening, the deed restriction issue, that's something, again, that the city is not looking at or monitoring. You may have a deed restriction in place on your property that prohibits that outright anyway, and that this would not be changing that.
So does the height doesn't change?
The height doesn't change. It's still 35 feet maximum, 2 stories. you could do 2 stories plus part of a 3rd floor attic space, just like you can today. But that height doesn't change from the zoning that's allowed today.
Let me add to that, and I will talk to the covenants. The covenants allow for single-family homes in this neighborhood. That's it. We will hold to that. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that if you change your house, you come to the review board and pass it by. We can do variances and things like that, but that's this. University of Wisconsin developed this neighborhood. They set up the architectural review committee to review any changes to, first of all, to keep neighbors from fighting each other. Because I already know of at least a couple times when people that's outside the purview of the architectural review committee, because of landscaping or whatever, we're probably going to go to court. We want to eliminate that, but we also want to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. So we will be putting in the newsletter what to do for the architectural review committee, and please contact us. I just got contacted over the weekend by someone who wanted to put in solar panels on their roof. We checked around with the board, the architectural review committee, it was fine. They were flush panels. We have no problem. So please contact us on that. But again, please read your covenants. Ma'am.
So I was curious, you talked about the growth of the city over the next 30 years. Is there anywhere that shows a chart of the growth of the city for, say, the past 30 years, projected into the next 30 years would be one. And then along with that, bus ridership. Do you have that and have that percentage and where it's been for the past 20 years and where you think it's going to go, and what other city are you basing the bus ridership anticipation on? So I'm kind of looking for visual charts that can show me maybe some of the information that you're using. And I know you probably don't have it here tonight, but where can I get that?
So we are working on updating some projections based on the state DOA releases population estimates every year, and so we're updating city projections using recently released state DOA information. And also, as you may know, we absorbed the town of Madison, so we want to reflect that as well. So I don't think we have a 100% up-to-date chart that I can point you to right now, but we should have something in the fairly near future that we'll post on the Planning Division website. For Metro Transit ridership, I don't have a specific path to point you on. I think Tom stepped out for a moment. You might be able to catch him as we wrap up to ask him what the best source of information for that is.
Because it sort of feels like you're trying to build a bus system, do the overlay to provide the ridership for the bus system versus building, and not that you're in charge of the bus system, but it feels like it's flipped. Like we're trying to get people to live close to the bus so that we have enough people riding the bus versus making the bus system serve the people that live here today. And I get that the increasing growth and all of that. And
yeah.
For me, though, it would be really helpful to see true data and then the projection. And maybe I'm sure that if there's projections, there's some information on what the projection is based on.
Sure. So I guess, Tom, just one question was Metro Transit ridership trends and if there are any projections. And so I don't know if you have any information that you can point folks to on that might be interested. And as far as the transit service, we're really doing both. We want to have more housing close to transit, but and this is another recent process that's wrapped up fairly in the fairly recent past, Metro network redesign. And so a big component of that was looking at where there are high population densities right now and how best to serve those with the limited transit service dollars that we can assign. So that is definitely a component of looking at transit service as well. So I don't know if you have anything you can share on transit ridership trends or.
We are increasing. We're not quite yet at pre-pandemic levels, but one thing that helps us is that we have
You know, our university system helps keep our system robust, and so we're probably, I'd say we're doing better than most transit systems in the United States as far as recovery, maybe 3/4 of where we were at with the trend line going upward. I think we are at about 27 riders per revenue service hour, you know, if that means anything to you, but that's relatively okay, you know, pretty good for the United States. And then to maybe focus on why not serve people where they're at. I think it's we went through a lot of that through the transit network redesign. And if you have one bus, right, and you have let's say a 40-unit apartment building, well, I can serve that one 40-unit apartment building in one block, you know what I mean, with a bus. Whereas if they're single-family units, then I have, 5 blocks to serve them. And so what ends up happening is that we end up having actually rather long and circuitous, types of bus routes, and people take a lot longer to get where they're at. And so when people live close to transit, it helps us because then we can serve more riders with the same number of buses, And so that's kind of the whole premise behind this the TOD. If put the people close to the transit, and then they're kind of mutually beneficial to each other.
I would say that we're a bus riding, bike riding, but we also have a disabled child that drives, and we like to keep it that way. But over the years, the changes in the bus system have actually made it so that the bus rider very often now will drive down to campus because there's no longer a quick direct route from Hill Farms. And I've filled out every survey and everything. So
just wait 18 months and you'll have it. Just wait 18 months and you'll have it.
I don't know that it will when we look at the new charts. And but that's why I'm like, what are we basing all this on? So I'm just looking for numbers and, as you talk about increase in population, I would like to see what Madison has done and where we're going. And so maybe I can email you guys after the meeting and say, hey, this
and then
I think it's important to be able to produce some data that says this is where we are, this is where we're going, versus for someone like, maybe not everybody, but for me, to get my buy-in, and I don't know if this is a good idea or bad idea, I don't know. But to get my buy-in, I want to see numbers, and I want to see data that says this is where we've been growing, and yes, this is the projection because of these things. And I think that helps everyone with understanding. So that's all. I'm really looking for
I'd say the city's comprehensive plan is a really great source of data. We have the projections and the way that they came about. What Lynn was alluding to is that those have been updated. We squashed our highest projection based on the 2020 census numbers, and so we need to fully refine and update those based on that 2020 census and the Department of Administration's numbers that came out from the state. But we have a solid explanation for our now out-of-date projections that have been surpassed, frankly, in the comprehensive plan.
Okay, let's maybe have just a couple more questions because I think Bob is going to be rolling out his roll-a-bed here shortly. Sir.
Just so I'm assuming now that the bus rapid transit route is 100% solidified. If we are putting we're doing this within a quarter mile of where that's going to be, is that correct now that that's 100% solidified? Because I know that
it's correct for that east-west route. Yes. So Mineral Point through downtown, all the way to basically East Town Mall.
Okay, because I know that there was some variations that were going to be possibly going through the neighborhood here, and so I was just kind of curious if that.
Yeah, that is solidified at this time. So University, Segoe, University,
Segoe,
Sheboygan, Whitney.
Okay, and
Mineral Point.
So then Whitney is still planning to go down to 1 lane then too?
Tom, do you have that?
Yeah, we have a typical section that we have a bus lane, a travel lane, and then the bike lanes.
Okay, because the thing that I think that's missed here is that, like right now, that we have a beautiful park just to the west of Whitney Way that I would say is downright dangerous to go to if you're walking. Yeah. And so if we make it one lane, like if Whitney Way is going to be one lane in each direction for cars, and with the fact of the matter that now that the belt line can have a lot more traffic on it, that the number of cars on Whitney Way seems a lot larger because of the way that we can have like there's whatever that expansion lane or the yep, and so the north-south through Whitney Way is, I'd say, like I've lived here 15 years, and it is busier now than it was pre-pandemic on Whitney Way. And if we take down to one lane, I just don't understand. And I know that that's not really part of what this is, but it just seems like we're talking about trying to have friendly neighborhoods and that kind of stuff and increasing, but all once if you decrease a main north-south thoroughfare for people, like if you're, and I know a lot of people that are over on the east side that aren't going through downtown anymore, they're going on the belt line and they're getting off on Whitney Way and they're coming Whitney Way. I don't see on how, if we're talking about growth projections, especially through this neighborhood, how Whitney Way is going to handle a huge influx of that traffic when it goes down to one lane.
These are all good questions and concerns. We're starting to pivot away a little bit from the TOD overlay zoning, but I would put another plug in and encourage folks. The West Area Plan was mentioned before, and this is a planning effort that's really just starting to get underway. Alder Tischler has mentioned it in his blog, and I think I would really encourage folks to sign up for that email list, look at that website, and look for announcements on that process where we'll be talking about some additional development and transit and transportation concerns really throughout the west area, beyond the TUD overlay portion.
Maybe shoot an email over to Yang Tao, who's traffic engineering, and let him know.
Yeah, I've emailed traffic at the city and I have not gotten a response.
Yeah, maybe my email's on the Department of Transportation, so of which traffic engineering is underneath. If you send an email to me, historic volumes on Whitney Way have been lower than pandemic, pre-pandemic, but I just made a note in my black book to check them again.
Okay. Can only take one last question.
Hey Joe, real quick, I just have a comment. I attended 4 meetings on VRT. Those concerns were brought up to them at that point in time, as well as increased traffic on Segoe as a result, which obviously has schools, or 2 schools. So we had brought those concerns before, almost to the T what you asked.
Copain, just take the last one.
Can I request a Hill Farm-wide email work for you, of the important people's emails and when we should email them? I think you will get a much greater participation rather than this emotional meeting and then we go home and blow it off.
I talked to Joe, I'm the technology director. We'll put a website,
Okay. It's already on the Hill Farm, she put out the map.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And I just want to let Alder Tischler, before you leave, Alder Tischler needs to...
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick that the real issue for me is going to be on January 17th. So I encourage as many of you to reach out to me, reach out to other alders, and also show up in person or show up on Zoom.